Hello. So this morning, going back to that rather mysterious house near Cambridge, and do you remember yesterday Tolly had just finished feeding the birds? His grandmother had put margarine all over his hands, and the birds had come to eat it. And then he went back in to his breakfast, and that's where we pick up the story today. So Tolly came quickly in and sat down where a place was laid for him opposite the fireplace. While he was eating, he looked round again at the room, with big windows looking out onto water. Suddenly, he saw something he'd not noticed all the night before, when the room had been full of firelight and shadows. Over the fireplace hung a large oil painting of a family, 3 children and 2 ladies in dark green silk suits. They had long hair but looked anything but girlish. The elder of the 2, who might be 14 years old, was wearing a sword, a book under his arm, and a flute in his hand. The little girl had a smile of irrepressible high spirits that seemed to defy the painter to do a serious portrait of her. She was holding a chaffinch, and beside her on the ground was an open wicker cage. One of the 2 ladies was young and beautiful. At her feet was a little curly white dog with a black face. On her arm was a basket of roses. The other lady was old and dressed in black. They all had large dark eyes, and all their eyes seemed to be fixed on Tolly. If he moved to one side, all the eyes moved after him. "Granny, they're all looking at me." "Well, I'm not surprised. You've only just come. They must be tired of looking at me." "Well, who are they?" "Well, they're old Knowes, your family. The boy with the deer is Toby, the other with the flute is Alexander, and the little girl is Linnet. She's 6 years old, and that is their mother in the blue dress." "My mother was called Linnet," said Tolly, "and that's you behind them." Oops. No, that's their grandmother, Mrs. Oldknow. "Is this their house?" "Yes, they lived here." "When did they live here?" "Oh, a long time ago," said Mrs. Oldknow, fidgeting and being suddenly very busy about the breakfast table. But Tolly was only 7, and it took him a long time, and to him, a long time ago meant more than 7 years. 5 lively pairs of eyes were challenging him to ignore them. Linnet was laughing straight into his. Even the dog looked as if it would play. "Has Toby got a real sword?" he asked. "Yes, of course." "Why?" "Because he's going to be a soldier. His father gave it to him when he was 13. "Is Alexander going to be a musician?" "No, he'll go to the university. He wants to be a poet." "And Linnet?" "Oh, my little Linnet." "Oh," said Tolly, interrupting, That's the bird cage in my room. It's the bird cage in my room. It made such funny shadows on the ceiling when you put the nightlight under it." "Is the doll's house Linnet's?" "No, the doll's house was mine when I was a little girl. I was brought up here by my uncle because I was an orphan." "Did you have brothers and sisters?" "No, but I played that I had. I was lonely. That's why I put 4 beds in the doll's house." "Did you play that they were your brothers and sisters?" said Tolly, pointing to the picture. Mrs. Oldknow looked hard at him. "Yes, my dear. How did you know?" "Because I think that's what I shall play. Do you want to read the newspapers now?" "Good gracious, no, child. Why should I do that? The world doesn't alter every day. As far as I can see, it's always the same. But I do have plenty to do, so you must amuse yourself, can you?" "Oh, yes." Excuse me. "I'd like to go up to the rocking horse and the mouse. Can I play with the cage if I can reach it?" "You can play with anything you like if you're careful. Don't fall out of the window." Tolly took 2 lumps of sugar from the bowl. "For the horse," he said. "Can I?" He ran upstairs to his room, as happy as a little boy could be. First, he pulled a chair under the wicker cage so that he could reach up to it. He opened the door, which made a little bird-like squeak as it turned on its hinges. He had nothing else to put in it, so he put the mouse in it and closed the door. He pretended to feed the horse with the sugar and put what was left over of it for the mouse. Then he groomed the horse all over with his hairbrush, particularly its mane and tail, and passed his hands down its legs as he had seen men do in stables, and talked to it all the time. He mounted it and started a long ride, creak-croak, pretending that Toby and Alexander and Linnet had invited him to visit them. "Horses always know the way," he said aloud. "I expect it will take hours and hours." He was cheerfully rocking along, singing at the top of his voice a song his mother used to sing to him before she died and the stepmother came. What is your one, oh, green grow the rushes, oh? What is your one, oh? One is one and all alone, and evermore shall be so. What are your two, oh? Green grow the rushes, oh? What are your two, oh? Two lily-white boys, clothed all in green, oh? One is one and all alone, evermore shall be. Window behind him. It was a chaffinch knocking on the glass for all the world as if it wanted to come in. Toseland dismounted and went over to see. Still it did not fly away, but held on to the crossbars and tried first one pane and then another. "Do you want to come in?" said Tolly, opening the window. Sorry, the silly cough will go in a minute. At once the bird flew in and perched on the cage. It hopped from one wicker strand to another, giving little excited calls until it found the door, which was shut. "Chip, chip, chip," it scolded, and fluttered round the room, making a little sound of bird footsteps on the wooden floor, where it hopped. Toseland opened the cage door, and the chaffinch flew straight across the room and into the cage. There it turned round and gave a little song, tried all the perches, hopped round to face both ways on each, swung on the swing, pecked at the sugar, and hopped out again, onto Tolly's head. "Don't," said Tolly, shaking it. "I don't like that. I can't see you." The bird flew off onto the windowsill, looking round at him with a final chirp, and dived into a big tree nearby, level with the window, where it perched and sang quietly to itself. "Oh, come back. Do come back, chaffinch. I wish I had some margarine. Perhaps sugar would do. Perhaps sugar won't do. I wonder what Linnet used to put into the cage. Chaffinch, chaffinch." But the bird would not be coaxed, and when he'd finished his song, shot off across the water like an arrow and disappeared into a distant tree. The floods had begun to go down. Already Tolly could see spikes of grass sticking up through the edge of the water. The shapes of lawns and flower beds were showing through the ripples round the house. He longed for the water to go so that he could explore the garden. When he came down for lunch, Boggis, in long wading boots, was bringing in logs for the fire, making a big stack of them in the corner of the inglenook. "Good morning, Mr. Boggis," said Tolly. "Have you come in the boat? I forgot to look last night to see what it was called." "Oh, it's called the Linnet, Master Toseland. I didn't come in it today. I came in my waders. The water's going down lovely." "The Linnet?" said Toseland, turning to his great-grandmother. "Yes," she said. "There's always a boat called Linnet on the river." "That's right," said Boggis. "There's always a linnet. This one's new, leastways not more than 20 years old. I used to go out in the old linnet when I was a boy, and my grandfather used to talk about fishing at night with torches from the linnet when he was young. See, Mum, I've managed to borrow these from my niece whose boy's in hospital." He held out some Wellingtons. "I reckon Master Toseland'll need these. Isn't he the fair spit of his grandfather? Might be the same come back." "Yes, he seems to belong here," said Mrs. Oldknow. He has it all hidden in him somewhere. I like to see him finding his way about." "Shall I take him out with me into the barn this afternoon while I cut wood, keeping out your way?" "Well, he's not in my way at all, but I expect he'd like to go." "Oh, yes, please." "Very well, Boggis. You can keep him till tea time. Goodbye, Toby." "You said Toby," said Tolly, pulling on his borrowed Wellingtons. "Why, so I did. I was forgetting." Boggis and Toseland paddled off side by side across the drive, and into a walled yard that was now a walled lake, though you could see the cobbles through the shallow water, all different colours like pebbles at the seaside. Along three sides were buildings or sheds, very old and tumble down. The longest had a row of arches, and over them bits of broken stone carving stuck out of the wall. Inside, it was divided up into little rooms with scrolled iron doorways opening onto a passage. Some were filled with straw, and some with faggots or peat. One was empty, and one had a wall ladder with hand and footholds instead of rungs. Up this Boggis went and through a trapdoor above. Tolly followed and found himself in a room rather like his bedroom, but much larger, smelling of hay and sawdust, and rich with a soft, musty kind of darkness. There was only one small round window covered with cobwebs, so that the light that came through was dove grey. Here and there a ray of white light came slanting through a broken roof tile, against which you could see the golden motes of dust in the air. It looked mysterious and enchanting. The floor made hollow noises and had holes in it where the boards had rotted. Up here, Boggis had a bench and a saw, and as he finished a log, he threw the pieces through the trapdoor onto the floor below. In one of the little rooms downstairs, Tolly had seen a chair and a table and a blue teapot and a mug. "Do you live here?" he asked. Boggis looked at him with teasing, bright blue eyes. "Well, it all depends what you call living," he says. "When I'm awake, I'm mostly here, but when I go home, I mostly sleeps." "Well, how long have you been here?" 55 years. I came when I was 12. But of course I knew it before, because my father worked here, same as me." "But what are those little rooms downstairs with park gates instead of doors?" "Stables," said Boggis briefly, out of breath with sawing. Tolly thought of the horses that had once lived in such grand rooms. "Were they very special horses?" "Oh, aye, they were fine horses when I was a lad, shining like the sun and dressed up like lords. I've never had an overcoat like they had. When they were led out, striking sparks out the cobbles with their hooves and shaking their bridles, they were proper eyeful. Your grandfather, Mr. Toseland as was, he was a rare one with the horse. He could make them do anything just by breathing secrets into their ears." Boggis went on with his sawing, and Tolly roamed round, his eyes getting used to the patchy light. He found other trapdoors which he could not lift, a whole row of them along one side. One was broken and lay off its hinges beside the square hole. Underneath on the stable wall was an iron basket to hold hay, into which he climbed. He crouched there, trying to imagine that the stall was occupied by the warm, silky body of a horse, feet stamping on straw, hindquarters fidgeting, tail swishing, and a great rolling black eye that could see backwards and forwards at the same time, half covered by mane and forelock. He tried so passionately to imagine it, to see, hear, and smell it, that the wonder is that no horse was there. "Hello there, Master Tosen, where are you?" "I'm here," he answered, standing up so that his head stuck out of the hole. "Oh, trust you to get in the haunted stall. Were you looking for Mr. Toby's horse by any chance? That stall's always kept empty in case he feels like spending a night there. Folks say you can hear him at night, whinnying for the young master." "Which young master?" "Oh, don't ask me. I ain't no good at history. One of the young masters, same as you." "Have you ever heard him whinnying?" Boggis cocked a half-humorous, half-serious eye at him. "I tells you, I sleeps at home, and that's where I dreams." Toseland climbed over the hay rack and let himself down into the manger. "You haven't put any hay for him," he said. "Oh, ghosts don't eat hay." "But they like to pretend." The manger was empty. It was as big as a bed, and he could lie full length in it. In that position, running his fingers along the cracks, he found a loose piece of wood wedged under the ledge of the manger at the back. Just for love of poking around, Toseland with great difficulty prized it out. On one side of it there was dirty paint. He rubbed it with his sleeve and saw that there were red and white patterns on it. He licked his handkerchief and rubbed harder. Some letters appeared, very queer, spiky, spidery letters, not like print at all. "Mr. Boggis, look what I've found." Boggis came and peered through the trap door. "Now then, don't you take nothing away you finds here. We don't want no souvenir hunting here." Toesland put it down in the bottom of the manger. "There ought to be hay," he thought. Of course they ought to put hay. Then he remembered that he still had a piece of sugar that he'd taken for the rocking horse. He put it carefully exactly in the middle of the painted board. Then he climbed down from the manger and ran up the ladder again to the loft. It was getting so dark by now that Boggis had lit his storm lantern to finish his sawing. The loft looked even more exciting by lamplight, but in another quarter of an hour, Boggis said it was tea time to go in. Toesland walked in front of the lantern, and they stepped from the stables into shallow water and waded towards the house. As they went under the big yew trees, the lantern lit up the underneath of the branches, making them look like rafters in wild magic houses. The windows of Greene Knowe were all lit up again. Tolly felt as if he had lived here always, instead of just one day. And that's, I think, where we'll finish for today. And tomorrow, we might find out a bit more about that mysterious horse in the stables. So bye for now. See you tomorrow.